Please.
Good evening, respected consultants. I am Dr. Veerpan. I'm a final year postgraduate student in Powai Medical Center and Hospital. I'm here to present about a baby, an infant named Akshaya. Akshaya, she's aged 2 months and 25 days old, female infant, born of a non-consanguineous marriage. She was brought from a rural Tamil Nadu. The informant was her mother and the reliability was good. She presented to us with the chief complaints of poor weight gain noticed since birth and increased frequency of stools for the past 15 days and generalized swelling of the body for the past 2 days. History of presenting complaints. Akshaya presented with the history of suboptimal weight gain. This was initially noted during her vaccination visit at a nearby PHC when she went for her 6 weeks vaccination, routine vaccination visit. During that time, when she was weighed, she had gained only 200 grams from her birth weight. So during that time, baby was on exclusively breastfed, and she was passing urine for more than 6 times a day, and she was passing well-formed stools around 6 to 7 times a day. The doctor in the PHC advised the parents to get evaluated for the same and to consult a pediatrician for this suboptimal weight gain, and which was ignored by the parents. Now she's presented with increased frequency of stools for the past 15 days, which is watery in consistency. She's passing around 10 to 15 episodes of stools per day, which is profuse, sometimes frothy and pale colored stools. No blood or mucus tinged stools, no history of bloating, there is no history of any redness around the anal region, no history of fever or vomiting, no history of excessive crying while passing stools. And mother also gave history of decreased urine output for the past 2 weeks. Again, child is also having generalized swelling of the body for the past 2 days. This was initially noted by the mother as facial puffiness and periorbital swelling. 1 day later, she also noticed there is abdominal distension along with the swelling of both the lower limbs also. She did not have any history of fast breathing. There is no history of any forehead sweating. There is no history of any suck rest suck cycle, and no history of bluish discoloration of body. No history of yellowish discoloration of eyes, or no history of passing of dark colored urine. There is no history of any peri-orificial rash noted during this 2.5 months period. No history of dysuria, and there is no history of any excessive cry or straining during menstruation. There is no history of any faulty child rearing practices like administration of extra lacteal feeds or bottle feeding. Child was exclusively breastfed till the time of presentation. Past history. After the onset of this increased frequency of stools, baby was admitted in a nearby hospital on day 5 of illness, and she was given antibiotics, IV fluids, and other supportive care, and baby was discharged after 2 days of hospitalization, but symptoms persisted. There's no other significant medical or surgical history for this child. Antenatal history. Akshaya was born to a third gravida mother. Last childbirth was 2 years back. It was a spontaneous conception at the age of 27. Mother was registered in a nearby local hospital. She had 4 antenatal visits. No history of any medical illness during her pregnancy period. She took iron and folic acid supplementation regularly. No history of any blood transfusion or iron injections. Weight gain during the pregnancy was said to be adequate for the mother. No history of any fever with rash or burning menstruation. There is no history of any PAH or GDM. Antenatal scans were said to be normal. There is no history of any polyhydramnios. Birth history. Akshaya was born term. She was delivered at 37 weeks by emergency cesarean section. Indication was meconium strain lifer on 19 February 2021 at a nearby hospital in rural Tamil Nadu. She was said to have cried soon after birth, but her Apgar history was not available. She was born with a birth weight of 2.4 kg. There is no history of any NICU admission. Akshaya started on direct breastfeeding within 3 hours, and she was noted to be latching well. No history of any prelacteal feeds, and she did not have any feeding difficulty soon after birth. She was discharged on day 3 of life, and the baby's weight at the time of discharge was 2.2 kg, and the immediate postnatal events were uneventful. Family history. She was third born of non-consanguineous marriage. Maternal age at the conception was 27 years. No history of any stillbirths or abortions. There is history of 2 previous sibling deaths. First sibling was a female child. She passed away at 2.5 years of age. According to the history, she passed away because of inadequate weight gain. She also had similar complaints, and she had some respiratory infections, and she died at 2.5 years of age. Second was a male child. That baby was also exclusively breastfed, and baby did not thrive well. Baby had a inadequate weight gain, and baby passed away at 3 months of age. No other similar history in other family members. Developmental history, gross motor, there is transient neck holding is present, fine motor, hand regard is seen, social smile is seen, and baby is alert to mother's voice, language makes sounds and goes. Nutritional history, baby was exclusively breastfed, no, not on any extralactal or bottle feeds. Mother reported to have adequate milk secretion. Usually, she used to give 7 to 8 feeds a day, for which 15 to 20 minutes for each feeding, and she feeds every 2 to 3 hours. She was not given any vitamin D or calcium or iron supplementation. Baby used to pass 6 to urine times daily. Only for the past 15 days, her urine output is reduced. She was vaccinated till 1.5 months as per UIP schedule. Vaccination at 2.5 months was deferred in view of current systemic illness. Socioeconomic history, both parents have passed their high school. Father is a skilled agricultural worker. Total family income is 15,000. As per modified Kuppusamy socioeconomic status scale 2021, family comes under lower middle socioeconomic class. So this is my summary from the history. 2 months and 25 days old, female baby, third born of non-consanguineous parents, with history of 2 sibling deaths, exclusively breastfed, presented with inadequate weight gain, 2 weeks history of persistent diarrheal disease, and 2 days history of generalized swelling of the body.
Dr. Veerappan?
Yes, sir.
We'll take a break here, and I will request the moderators to start interrogating the candidates based on the history and the story that you've so beautifully summarized so far. Dr. Geeta and Dr. Rohan?
Dr. Veerappan, the mother is inside exclusively breastfed. The mother is taking milk or cow's milk and all that? Is the mother on animal milk?
She used to take cow's milk in the form of tea twice a day.
Okay. And can you elaborate on the SIP deaths a little more? Can you go back to that slide where you were showing the SIP deaths?
Yeah.
Yes. First baby had a similar illness, sir. According to the history, what mother gave, baby was born in a normal vaginal delivery. Baby had failure to thrive in the form of the baby had suboptimal weight gain. Whenever the mother takes the child for checkups, they used to say weight gain is inadequate. At 2.5 years of age, child had some respiratory infection, and baby was intubated in a medical college hospital and was.
So both siblings had similar complaints.
Yes, sir.
What about diarrhea? Did they have diarrhea? These siblings, did you ask specifically for diarrhea?
Diarrhea in the sense of no, sir. They don't. What mother gave is only their weight gain. It's not for any diarrheal illness. Both the children did not have any diarrheal histories.
And this child, maybe I missed that slide, but this child has no diarrhea. There's only failure to thrive.
Well, the child has had 2 weeks of loose stools.
Loose stools.
Can you go back to the slide of the, yeah.
Dr. Geeta wants some slide. Can you?
Yeah, no, this one. Dr. Veerappan, can you just interpret this the slide? Can you just read back?
Can you analyze the diarrhea?
Yes, sir. So there is a profuse watery diarrhea, which no blood or mucus in the stools. Basically, in any diarrheal disease, we ask some leading questions to differentiate between whether it is a diarrheal disease of small bowel or large bowel origin. So based upon the quantity and nature of the stool, for example, a profuse watery diarrhea, foul-smelling stools, they all point towards a small bowel diarrhea. Passing small quantity stools frequently associated with pain, tenesmus, blood and mucus in the stools is consistent with a large bowel diarrhea. And The history of warm
Shivangi, can you mute others? Shivangi, can you mute others?
Sure, doctor.
So this diarrhea is very acute. It's not even 15 days. And you said there is, you said there is edema. There is
Yes, sir.
edema. So what do you think is causing that edema?
So basically, the child has anasarca, sir. She's having generalized swelling of the body.
Yeah.
We classify anasarca based upon the system of origin. Anasarca can be explained by a cardiac pathology or a renal pathology, or protein losing states like hypoalbuminemia can cause anasarca. So there is no history of any fast breathing or forehead sweating or Sakra cycle. This against the cardiac pathology, against congestive cardiac failure. There is no history of any dysuria or discoloration of urine or decreased anuric phase, which is against renal pathology. Even yellowish discoloration of skin or history of jaundice can point towards a hepatic pathology. Or there is a state where protein is getting lost somewhere in the stools, can also explain this edema. So it is most probably pointing towards that.
So what is that syndrome called?
Yeah.
When you lose protein in the stools and you have anasarca, what is it called?
Sir,
So protein losing enteropathy.
yes, sir. Intestinal lymphangiectasia.
That is the pathology. That is the diagnosis. But when you have protein loss in the stool, syndromic diagnosis becomes protein losing enteropathy. Then you can have different etiologies of protein losing enteropathy. Have you heard this term, protein losing enteropathy, Dr. Veerappan?
Protein losing enteropathy.
So whenever you have hypoproteinemia and you check the urine and you do all these tests that you said and you don't find a cause of protein loss, especially if total protein albumin both are low and you're not losing protein in the urine, then you are losing protein in the stool.
Yes, sir.
So this means there is some gut disease which is causing protein loss, and there are various gut diseases that you will think of first when you get a child with protein losing enteropathy. Like you mentioned, one of them, you said lymphangiectasia.
Lymphangiectasia.
So this is one point which can help in the diagnosis, I think.
Dr. Deepa,
Yes, sir.
it's very common for breastfed infants to have loose stools probably between day 5 and day 15. So this is very common in breastfed infants, that the mothers complain that the baby is passing frequent stool every time the baby is being breastfed. Could this be just breast milk stools? How do you differentiate this from breast milk stools? Is
Sir,
this
infant
the same as
babies
breast milk
normally,
stools, or this is something sinister going on here?
yes, sir, because of increased gastrocolic reflex, infant babies can have increased frequency of stools. But in this case, our baby presented with suboptimal weight gain. Even if
Yes.
it was breastfed stool, there won't be suboptimal weight gain for the baby.
Excellent. Correct. But Dr. Bablu, are there any red flags that you look for specifically to say that this is not just breast milk stools, but something more dangerous? Are there any pointers in the history that he said which will help you? Dr. Bablu?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hmm.
So, so if it is just a gastrocolic reflex, it will be like baby will be passing stool after each and every feeds. So it's
Yes.
just based on the motility, but there is no history suggestive of that sort of. So there is nothing suggestive that baby is passing stool just after a feed. What they are telling is that there is increased frequency of stools, that's around 10 to 15 times a day, like not associated with feeding. That is the main thing, sir. And other thing is that it is frothy and like multiple episodes, and it's associated with reduced weight gain. There is other edema as well. So
Do you think this problem has
it's not
started
normal.
only after the loose stools has started for the past 15 days, or there is some red flag there to say that something else is happening even before the onset of loose stools?
Yes, sir, because weight gain was not appropriate.
What would have been an appropriate weight gain for an exclusively breastfed baby? I mean, what weight would you accept as acceptable?
Say the baby should gain around like at least 20 to 30 grams
Per day.
per day. Yeah.
Okay, so at the first vaccination visit, the baby has already started showing that there is only 200 grams weight gain even before the onset of diarrhea,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Deepa, can you tell us what are the probable reasons why a baby who's being exclusively breastfed, which is the correct way to nurse an infant, should fail to thrive without diarrhea? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, if it is an exclusively breastfed baby, then first we have to assess the feeding of the mother, whether there were faulty feeding practices, whether the latching, positioning, etc. were correct, and whether there's any history such of hind milk deficiency. If the mother was only feeding for milk, that will only satisfy the thirst of the baby. Only hind milk will provide calories to the baby for weight gain.
Okay.
And also any histories to suggest any faulty child rearing practices. That also we have to suspect. If in an exclusively breastfed baby, when they are presenting with failure, inadequate weight gain, that is the first thing that we have to check the feeding assessment.
Okay, fine. Anything else, Dr. Rohan or Dr. Deepa?
I think Dr. Geeta had questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Veerapan, in this slide, you have put no history of fast breathing, forehead sweating, etc. What relevance
Yes,
does it
ma'am.
have to this patient with diarrhea?
No, ma'am. I wanted to convey this anasarca is not of a cardiac origin, or basically I wanted to rule out the systemic causes for anasarca. So I just put this fast breathing success cycle so that I can rule out a cardiac cause of this anasarca. Yellowish discoloration of the eyes and dark urine to rule out any hepatic pathology. That also can explain anasarca for this child.
Agreed. But if you were to put this, it's a stretch of imagination, not that it is irrelevant in this case, but if you were to put a cardiac issue and anasarca together, I think
Yes,
Dr.
ma'am.
Rohan gave a clue a little while ago. What condition would you think of? A child with a congenital heart disease with some amount of failure-like symptoms and anasarca. Is there any condition that comes to mind?
So he has already
congenital
given
heart
you
disease.
some idea about protein losing enteropathy. What would cause
Yes.
the intestinal lymph channels to open up? Are there any cardiac causes why the lymph channels will start weeping protein-rich fluid into the gut, leading to protein losing enteropathy and the same presentation?
Constrictive carditis.
Some congenital heart disease are
Ma'am,
known to
it's very
produce
specific about a congenital heart
lymphangiectasis.
disease. We don't think of constrictive pericarditis in a 2.5-month-old baby, right? Your answer is right, but not in this setting. Madam has asked you a specific question. Congenital heart disease manifesting with protein losing enteropathy because of chronic congestion of the lacteals. Anything which obstructs the flow of blood from the right atrium to the right ventricle?
Tricuspid atresia.
Ma'am, would you accept that as an answer, ma'am?
It's okay. Actually, even valvular, not only valvular heart defects, but also septal defects. Anything that can cause pressure on the azygous vein can result in lymphangiectasia, which can be actually resolved after the surgery. What about yellowish discoloration of eyes or dark color urine? Can you associate that with the diarrhea? I
Ma'am,
understand that you have done it for the anasarca, but can you associate that with the diarrhea by any stretch of imagination? Any condition
Yes, ma'am.
with
Baby,
jaundice? Any
mother gave
condition
history.
with jaundice or cholestasis, which can also have diarrhea as a manifestation.
Some
Have you heard of progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis?
yes, ma'am. PFIC.
Yeah, PFIC type 1. PFIC type 1 is known to be associated with loose stools, failure to thrive, and jaundice.
Jaundice.
So if they are asked by the examiner what is an association besides the anasarca, you can also say that jaundice and diarrhea are known to be associated in children with PFIC type 1. Could you go back one slide, please? Yeah, here we were you were interpreting the type of diarrhea. It's a 15 days duration, you said, watery, 10 to 15 episodes, profuse, frothy, and pale colored. What does this indicate to you? You said small bowel diarrhea, but
Yes, ma'am.
frothy,
This quantity
pale colored. So can you interpret that?
Yes, ma'am. Profuse quantity is pointing towards a small bowel diarrhea. Frothy and pale colored
Okay,
stool.
what is frothy?
Ma'am, it's
Yes.
it's a sign. Can be a sign of
Yeah, so what is
malabsorption.
frothy?
Can be a sign of malabsorption of fat.
Malabsorption of what?
Fat.
Okay. Malabsorption of fat can produce pale color stools. What causes frothy stools?
Frothy can be there in lactose intolerance and lactose malabsorption also.
Yeah.
So,
Carbohydrate malabsorption. So what are the other features of carbohydrate malabsorption and that you will ask for?
ma'am, any perianal rash, perianal excoriation because the child used to pass some acidic stools that can interrupt the skin around the anal region, can have skin rash. There will be abdominal distension or bloating can be there, ma'am, and there can be flatulence or bloating. They all point towards a carbohydrate malabsorption.
So there is excessive, it's pale colored, it's profuse, frothy, very gassy, and also produces perianal excoriation because of the acidity. Why is there acidity in carbohydrate malabsorption?
Ma'am, as this glucose and lactose is not getting absorbed, it is acted upon by colonic bacteria. So it produces some acidic substances because of action of colonic bacteria. So that gives the stools an acidic nature and that excoriates the skin.
Yeah, the short chain fatty acids are produced because of unabsorbed carbohydrate, and that results in short chain fatty acids are produced because of action of the unabsorbed carbohydrate is acted upon by the colonic bacteria, and that produces the redness around the anal region. So you're saying that in effect this child does not have protein malabsorption, does not have much of fat malabsorption, sorry, carbohydrate and fat malabsorption in this. So that is the interpretation here. It's a small bowel diarrhea without, not a colonic diarrhea. There is no colitis, no blood or mucus, and there is no evidence of carbohydrate malabsorption, no evidence of fat malabsorption. That's what you're trying to say in this slide. You can go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
So what do you think is the cause of swelling here?
Ma'am,
Now
from
the
this
child
history,
developed anasarca.
so possibilities are either the child is proteins are getting lost in the stools that is resulting in hypoalbuminemia that can explain the anasarca.
Okay.
Could this be acute kidney injury? You said this baby is passing less urine in the past 48 hours. Is it possible that the baby has an evolving acute kidney injury?
Yes, sir, possible, but now there is no history of any.
Right now you keep your possibilities open. Don't
Yes,
tell a very narrow diagnosis, differential diagnosis. You can say anything is possible.
yes, ma'am.
It's possible that the child could have had anasarca due to protein loss, or there could be sepsis, there could be evidence of another organ like kidney injury. All this is possible in this patient. Okay. Yeah, you can go. You can move
You were
forward.
asked very
Yeah,
specifically for a periorificial rash, Dr. Veerappan. Dr. Bablu, would you be able to comment why he's put this point particularly? Periorificial rash, not just perianal. What orifice is he talking about? What is the relevance of this history?
So periorificial rash can be seen in acrodermatitis. Sir. It can be like perioral, perianal. So
Typical vesicular eruption would point towards a zinc deficiency.
Yes,
It may not be acrodermatitis, any zinc deficiency.
Zinc deficiency.
Correct. And what is the relevance of dysuria and staining during micturition in a child with 14 days history of loose stools?
So we are ruling out UTI, sir. This UTI can be a renal cause, further leading to anasarca as well. So it can lead to like further kidney injury. It can lead to anasarca. That is one thing. So it can also present, a UTI can also present as parenteral
That is
diarrhea.
more important. Okay.
You see, Dr. Virappan, if you have a kidney disease, because my ward is shared by the nephrologist, so I end up seeing a lot of pediatric kidney disease also. If you have kidney disease causing anasarca in a young infant, he will not give you these 4 months to present. Anasarca with kidney disease, that means he's having oliguria, fluid retention. He gets sick pretty fast. And you have this long history of, some loose stool, there is a history of SIP death, and you have anasarca. So protein loss like this, it is either through the kidney or through the gut. So in a case like this, if you have low proteins and urine protein is negative, then definitely there is some gut disease going on. The other thing, very important thing Dr. Geeta asked you was frothy stools and all that. So one very important history they give us is, especially if they are handling the diapers, the patient parents are handling the diapers. They will tell you that the diapers are, it's a little bit difficult to clean their hands after they handle the diapers. The hands get sticky. So if you ever had some coconut oil spill on your hands and then try to wash it just with water, realize you need an organic solvent for that fat. So that they say in Hindi, they tell us ki badi mushkil se haath dhulte hain. They might tell you that, it's very difficult. My hands get a little bit sticky, and they will have, sometimes if you're lucky, they will give you a history of, fat globules and all that. It's not common. The other thing to remember is, carbohydrate malabsorption. Carbohydrate malabsorption may not always present with, these frothy stools and explosive diarrhea. Just the fact that the child is not gaining weight itself is a symptom that maybe there is carbohydrate malabsorption. And carbohydrate malabsorption is not specific for any disease. A long list of diseases can cause chronic inflammatory conditions. Chronic conditions can cause carbohydrate malabsorption. And one thing with Dr. Geeta said is very important is, don't try to make a diagnosis. Okay. You have to first go to a syndromic diagnosis. Syndromic diagnosis is this a chronic diarrhea or not? Is this a protein losing enteropathy or not? Is there failure to thrive? Other complications? When was the onset? What kind of a diarrhea is it? Small bowel diarrhea, large bowel diarrhea? Is it an inflammatory diarrhea or a non-inflammatory diarrhea? Is it a protein losing enteropathy? Is it a fatty diarrhea? Is it an osmotic diarrhea? So these are the questions you have to answer in this case at the end of your history. So when you take your history, keep these questions. Whenever you have an infant with this sort of history, these are the questions you have to answer. Is it chronic? Is it small bowel, large bowel? Is it osmotic? Is it secretory? Is it inflammatory? Is it fatty? Is it protein loss? And then what are the associated features which will help you come to narrow down to an entity, pathological entity? In this case, you have very significant family history. So I think if you look at it from that lens, you can narrow down your positive points at the end of the history. And a good clinician can make the diagnosis at the end of your history. You should have a list of differentials at the end of your history, which are just confirmed on examination. You will not find a groundbreaking finding on examination. It will just confirm what you are thinking in history if you have taken a proper history.
Dr. Veerappan, Dr. Rohan already asked you a few questions. Maybe you can start analyzing from that aspect. Now, do you think this is an acute diarrhea or a chronic diarrhea?
This duration has already crossed 2 weeks, around 15 days it is present. So it is a persistent diarrhea, so protracted diarrhea would be called. So again, it is all the characters are. Ma'am?
What is the difference between chronic and chronic protracted? Is there any difference between all three?
Persistent diarrhea we usually call, according to definition, any diarrheal illness which is usually lasting for more than 2 weeks or 14 days, which is presumed to be of an infective etiology, but that is not settling down. We call it as persistent diarrhea. Chronic diarrhea, as per the new definition, be any diarrheal illness which is lasting for more than 4 weeks. It is labeled as chronic diarrhea. So in this history, we have a 15 days duration of diarrhea. So I'll put it in the category of persistent diarrhea, and it's a profuse watery stools, again pointing towards a diarrheal disease of small bowel origin, which is sometimes frothy and pale colored stools, which is pointing towards some nutrient is, some pathologies in the form of malabsorption. And there is no perianal rash, and there is no history of any flatulence, again, that is deviating from a carbohydrate malabsorption. And again, osmotic and secretory, again, we can differentiate only on the basis of if the child is put on any alternate diet, or if the child is kept NPO, if the diarrhea is getting stopped or getting controlled, then we can label it as osmotic diarrhea. And so that osmotic and secretory we can make different. And secretory.
Can I make a comment here, if you allow? Can I just make a comment?
So please.
So, Dr. Veerappan, this is important to understand. Persistent diarrhea is something unique to our geography. And you have to understand this, this nomenclature is meant for something else. It is not for making a diagnosis. Persistent diarrhea is a condition seen in countries like ours, where then acute diarrhea starts and then doesn't stop. So, 80% of all acute diarrheas will stop in 1 week. About 90% will stop in 2 weeks. About 5 to 10% will continue for various reasons. It is not always an infection. It is lactose intolerance or something. But it is a innocuous diarrhea, a common garden variety of type of diarrhea which starts and then persists for various reasons, which we call as persistent diarrhea. Now, this is very common in our country compared to what you are trying to here analyze is you are trying to analyze an infant who has chronic diarrhea. Chronic diarrhea has no solid definition. It can be any diarrhea from 2 to 4 weeks of duration. So if you are thinking of something more sinister than a persistent diarrhea, I mean, in etiology, if you're thinking like in this case, you would think of maybe a genetic etiology, then the difference between persistent and chronic it's not important, because then you basically say this is chronic diarrhea, and it is not that entity that we are calling as pediatricians, that this is persistent diarrhea, starts acutely, continues for 2 weeks. It is not that condition. So even if the duration is fitting into that persistent diarrhea definition, you have to understand why these definitions have come and what you are trying to analyze here in this case.
Yes.
The other differences between osmotic and secretory diarrhea, you said?
Ma'am, secretory, there will be profuse watery stools, and amount of dehydration will be more in case of secretory diarrhea. And again, the osmolarity can be like if the baby is weaned off from a particular diet or kept NPO, the frequency of loose stools can come down in case of an osmotic diarrhea, but the diarrhea used to continue in case of a secretory diarrhea. Means it will not respond to fasting. And
that's one.
Again, we have a certain characteristic way we calculate.
Calculate what?
Stool osmolar gap that we do in the investigations that gives a clue whether it is an osmotic or a secretory diarrhea.
What will it be in osmotic and what will it be in secretory? Anybody can answer, not just Dr.
Stool osmolar gap will be more than
Dr. Veerappan. I think Dr. Deepa will be wondering whether she's still part of the team. Could you let her answer a few questions as well? Deepa?
Dr. Deepa can answer.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, secretory diarrhea, it will be large volume. Generally, we tell it is more than 1 liter per day. And even if we keep the baby NPO also, it will persist. It will persist with fasting. And if we calculate the stool osmolar gap, that will be less than 100. While in osmotic, it will be more than 100. And osmotic diarrhea, it will decrease with fasting. If we keep the baby NPO, the diarrhea frequency will come down. And it's comparatively low volume, less than 1 liter, roughly.
Is the gap less than 50 or less than 100?
And some books
check it up, okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Just check it up. I'm not sure. I thought it was less than 50 and more than 50.
It
is more than 50 in what type of diarrhea?
Osmotic, ma'am.
Which type of diarrhea is it more than 100?
osmotic.
And why is it so?
But that is because
Why is it so?
there is
Why
some
is it-
osmotically active substance, ma'am, that is not getting digested or absorbed. That is causing the drawing of fluid into the lumen. Some osmotically
Okay, very
active
good.
solute
And
is causing the diarrhea.
okay, very good. There's one more PG involved in the discussion, right? How
Dr.
do you calculate
Balu,
this osmolarity?
Yes, ma'am.
The osmotic gap, how do you calculate it?
290 minus 2 into stool sodium plus stool potassium.
Stool potassium. Okay.
This
very
question
good.
I can also never remember, Dr. Gita. What is normal osmotic gap and how to calculate it? But practically,
Okay.
what we do, what Dr. Veerappan said, is you just fast them for 6 to 8 hours. If the stool stops, it is osmotic. Most diarrheas are mixed. They have both osmotic and secretory.
So they may not stop or they may reduce, but not stop completely. So then you will get confused again. Just for the for their practices, for them to understand for the exam. So can we go to the next slide? Okay, so next slide, the family history.
Mm.
Okay. Okay. Okay, this one.
Are you sure there
You
is
said
no
some
consanguinity?
siblings,
Yes, sir. Very sure.
because 3 children all seem to be affected by something. What is your interpretation, Dr. Veerappan or Dr. Deepa? What is your interpretation of this family history? What could be with relevance to the present child with diarrhea and other siblings having died at very young age, one with diarrhea and one with pneumonia?
Ma'am, some condition is running in the family that is affecting both the sexes. I mean, first child was a girl and the second child was a boy and third is a girl. So it is equally affecting both the sexes. And they had some first child passed away because of some pneumonia, and that child also had some failure to thrive because the baby did not thrive properly.
What condition?
Ma'am,
What condition?
ma'am, the possibilities with this can be an immunodeficiency syndrome, or it can be any malabsorption syndromes, are all possibilities pertaining with this scenarios, ma'am, and with positive family history.
Okay. So you think this typically is history of immunodeficiencies running in the family, or like you said, any chronic malabsorptions also possible.
Yes, ma'am.
Like you said in this issue. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to add, Dr. Rohan?
No, I think should we. So now, if we are analyzing the history, I guess so. You should write down. So you have a child who is not gaining weight on breastfeed. Number one, has protein loss and diarrhea and possibly other malabsorptions. Has a very significant, has a small bowel type of diarrhea. You don't know yet whether it is osmotic or not. And you have a very significant family history. So now, what conditions will fit into all these positive data points that you have? What condition presents in the first few months of life with diarrhea, fail to thrive, may have pneumonia, and protein loss, and anasarca and small bowel type of diarrhea? What are the conditions that you think of? Names of diseases that you think of, in this age? This child at presentation is 4 months, you said.
2.5 months.
2.5 months. No, when he came to you, the child is now 4 months.
No, 2.5 months.
2.5. Okay, so very early onset, very, very early onset, very strong genetic history. There is protein losing enteropathy. There is small bowel type of diarrhea. What conditions will you think of?
Sir, very early onset, I'll basically put in this type. If it is of presumed of infective etiology, if the child is getting repeated infections, then severe combined immunodeficiency is a possibility, because that is causing early onset that can present in the early infantile period. And conditions like...
So how many, if you look at a series of SCID, how many of them present just with diarrhea? Diarrhea is not the most common. They will have pneumonias, skin infections, sinus
Right.
infections. I don't. You should keep a differential of SCID, but maybe not the first differential. Okay, go on.
Then so possibility of if it is an infection, then SCD is a possibility. If it is a non-infectious condition like malabsorption syndromes, my differentials will include a cystic fibrosis or any primary liver pathology or cholestatic conditions that is resulting in malabsorption.
Why cholestatic? Where is the cholestasis? Why are you thinking? And why CF is your first differential?
No, sir,
What is pointing you towards CF?
I just want to put it in this way: malabsorption, that is because of pathology somewhere in the bowel or somewhere in the pancreas.
What are the more common causes of? You are basically looking at a genetic enteropathy here. Okay, these are now called congenital diarrheas and enteropathies, CODEs, codes. This is the term for this infant's disease, congenital diarrheas and enteropathies. So what are the congenital diarrheas and enteropathies that will present this early in life? CF is not the first one, and CF is not an enteropathy. CF is a maldigestive disorder. It is not a malabsorptive disorder. One thing we didn't discuss in the types of diarrhea is difference between maldigestion and malabsorption. Okay. So CF is a maldigestive disorder. I'm saying if you are having protein loss, if you are having SIB death, your first differential is a CODE, congenital diarrheas and enteropathy. So this child may well have CF, but that is not the way you should approach it. So what will be above CF and SCID? What are the codes that you know about?
Sir, like for example, any villus pathology like microvillus inclusion disease, tufting enteropathies.
Yes.
Microvillus inclusion disease, tufting enteropathy, then carbohydrate deficient glycoprotein syndrome, CDE, and heparin sulfatase.
There is a long list of genetic enteropathies which you will have to approach, and you will have to dissect out from this child what is possible or not. Some of them which are more common, they are not common, but they are more common. You have mentioned congenital tufting enteropathy, CTE, microvillus inclusion disease. A child presenting this early, you should think of autoimmune enteropathy also. You have protein loss. Why not a genetic lymphangiectasia? Why not DGAT deficiency? These are things which cause protein loss as a more prominent symptom. So you have hypoproteinemia, anasarca. Think of lymphangiectasia, and there are certain genetic causes of lymphangiectasia. Then you should think of DGAT deficiency. That's also a genetic disorder which will cause hypoproteinemia. You have not clearly demonstrated that there is of course failure to thrive in carbohydrate malabsorption, which is not a specific symptom, but you have very clearly demonstrated there is protein loss. But there is no clear-cut fat that, I am not convinced that there is fat in the stool. By your history, there might be, but you don't know that yet. So you should keep congenital conditions which cause protein loss as a more prominent symptom in your differentials the higher up. And all these other things that you are mentioning, it should go lower down, in my opinion. I think Geeta can also comment.
What I would like to just clarify for the sake of the pages is that Dr. Rohan was telling there are two types of entities. One is enteropathy, that is diseases affecting the bowel wall itself. It could be defects in the channels, it could be defects in the mucosa, it could be defects in the endocrine cells, it could be immune system, anything in the bowel wall. These are all collectively called as enteropathies. The other is the maldigestion. The maldigestion is when there are deficiencies in the digestive enzymes which enter into the bowel. For example, if you're having pancreatic enzymes deficiency, lipase deficiency, all this can result in maldigestion of the food and therefore a diarrhea. If there is a defective bile secretion, that also can result in fat malabsorption and a diarrhea. So maldigestion is when the digestive process itself is at fault because of various deficiencies or inability of the digestive enzymes to reach the bowel. And the other one, the enteropathies, is when there are defects in the intestinal wall. The defects in the intestinal wall can be hereditary or genetic, and these are very common to present within 3 months of age. And most of them are fatal also. So many of them cannot be diagnosed easily. So you should keep this as a group, as a differential diagnosis in your mind. And of course, cystic fibrosis will come at some point of time, but don't jump to that directly. So when you analyze the history, like Dr. Rohan was saying, there is a small bowel diarrhea. It points more towards the bowel pathology. Therefore, this as well as cystic fibrosis should be kept in your differential diagnosis, and only investigations will help you differentiate them later, because child is so young. It's difficult to get a proper protein losing enteropathy, proper fat malabsorption or carbohydrate malabsorption for this child. Also, if you were to negate this family history, supposing there was no history, this was the first child, you don't know, there is no other sibling, this is the first child and is presented with diarrhea. In which case, would you add anything to your differential diagnosis?
Um,
Think of simple things, like Dr. Rohan said, lymphangiectasia. Can cow milk protein allergy present like this?
yes, ma'am. If mother is taking excess of cow's milk, that can cause diarrheal illness in the infant.
It need not be excessive. It could be just it need not be excessive milk intake.
Yes,
The normal cow's milk intake. So many people assume that because the baby is exclusively breastfed, the baby cannot have cow milk protein allergy, which is not true. If the mother is consuming dairy products, also the baby can develop this kind of cow milk protein allergy, which can also present with anasarca, which can also present with diarrhea of 15 days duration with failure to thrive. Sometimes it can even present with colitis, blood in stools. But it's not a must that they must present with the colitis. It can just be the diarrhea. So cow milk protein allergy is a common condition and should also be thought of instead of thinking of rare conditions. Like if the examiner asks that this is the first child, there is no history, I mean, you cannot get a history of family SIB death and all that, then you should think of cow milk protein allergy also as differential diagnosis. What about FPIES? Is this an age for FPIES? Can this child have food protein intolerance syndrome?
Dr.
Have
Deepa?
you heard of that condition?
Ma'am, it usually present when a solid food item is introduced into the diet, and it presents immediately after the introduction of food item. There will be child presence in a severe shock-like state with hemodynamic instability. It will be severe shock-like presentation, usually after introduction of a solid food item, usually in the weaning time.
Yes.
Because of
It can
the
also
allergy.
happen because of the. You were saying you can complete your sentence.
Now it's an adverse food reaction. It's an allergic reaction to any of the food protein that they may have introduced as part of weaning. Not so.
Okay.
This is an exclusive breastfed baby, so.
Okay. So food protein induced enterocolitis or can be an allergic or severe anaphylactic-like reaction, which usually occurs when some weaning diet is introduced or for the first exposure and presents like almost a shock-like syndrome. Child is very lethargic, very tired, but can present with anasarca. So because of your history of diarrhea, anasarca, and which is pointing to something like a sepsis which is partly treated, that could be one of the differential diagnoses. But for this child, it's been going on for 15 days. And she's a very young child, exclusively breastfed, so maybe not, but it can present in a similar fashion. Sometimes what happens is somebody inadvertently gives one taste of any of this food to this child, or because the child has got some diarrhea, they try some alternative therapies for this baby, and those can introduce an element of food protein induced enterocolitis symptoms. So just remember that that presentation can also be similar. The age group will be a little different. And don't forget cow milk protein allergy. So these would be the other things you should keep in mind.
Dr. Deepa, before we leave this slide, would you care to comment on what are the possibilities of modes of inheritance? If we believe it's a genetic, could you comment on what are the likely modes of inheritance? Look at the sex of the involvement and can you comment on that?
So here we can see that one of the sibling was female and one was male. So both males and females are affected in this case. And when we see the previous two generations are not at all affected. So it's definitely not autosomal dominant, and autosomal recessive is a possibility. And here X-linked is definitely not a possibility, sir. And mitochondrial is also a possibility. So it
Fine.
could be either autosomal recessive or mitochondrial. Sir.
Dr. Rohan, do you have any more questions? Can we move on to the
I
next
think
part?
we can move on. Yes.
Sure. Geeta ma'am?
You can move on, please.
So just one, Dr. Virappan, your aim is to make eventually you have to make a diagnosis on your own. So it helps. This is the process that helped us in training. When you finish your summary, and you should have a slide on analysis that everything you have just discussed, the positive points, protein losing enteropathy, genetic cause, small bowel diarrhea, everything that we discussed, you should just list them out. It will help you to come to the diagnosis. So you can just tick off which entity then has the best fit for those points that you have written.
Yes, sir.
Pros and cons. What is against the diagnosis? What is for the diagnosis? So what are the points that are maximum for would come higher up, and then you can put all the differential diagnosis and say this is not likely or this is less likely.
Yeah, you should have a differential after your history.
Yes, sir. So examination, the baby infant appeared lethargic. She has a generalized edematous appearance. Child was pale. There is no icterus, there is no cyanosis, no lymphadenopathy, and bilateral pedal edema is there. Vital examination, heart rate is 140 per minute, respiratory rate was 40 per minute, BP measured with NEBP is 50 millimeters of mercury. Temperature was 36 degrees Celsius, and SpO2 measured in the right arm is 99 in room air. Capillary refilling time is less than 3 seconds, and all peripheral pulses were well filled. Head to foot examination. Head, the shape appears normal. Anterior frontal is 2 to 2 centimeters, level with the bone. Posterior frontal is closed, no frontal bruising. Hair, it is a sparse, lusterless hair with alternating hypo and hyperpigmented areas with no areas of alopecia. Facial puffiness is there, and there is no dysmorphic features. Eyes, pallor is present, and no signs of vitamin A deficiency, and periorbital swelling is there. Ears appear normal, no history of any purulent discharge from the ears. Mouth, no angular cheilitis or gum bleeds, no glossitis, no oral thrush, and tongue appeared dry. Chest, there is no Harrison sulcus, no rachitic rosary or scorbutic rosary, no increased precordial activity. Abdomen appeared distended with no dilated veins or no visible pulsations over the abdomen. Extremities, bilateral pitting pedal edema was present. Left arm BCG scar is seen. Nails, there is no abnormalities. Skin, there was a generalized dry skin was there. There is no dermatosis, no impetiginous lesions or pyoderma, no petechial hemorrhages. Genitals appeared normal. There is no perianal excoriation. Back and spine, there was a bit of sacral edema was seen. This is our anthropometric measurements. Weight at the time of examination was 3 kilos and 60 grams. When we plotted it, it was below the third centile. And we know the birth weight was 2.4 kg. And at 1.5 months at her vaccination visit, she had gained 200 grams. So it will be 2.6, and now it is 3 kg. So all the three weights were under the third centile for her age. Length of the baby was 51 centimeter, which again, yes, ma'am.
This weight is in the presence of what you obviously said is edema.
Yes, ma'am.
So in the presence of edema, this is an excessive weight. So what other measurement is much more reflective of the nutritional status of the child?
Weight for length of and
No. That measurement is not there on this chart. When you have children with edema, even in cirrhotic patients or anasarca patients or renal nephrotic syndrome patients, how will you assess nutrition, malnutrition? Is there one more missing measurement in this page?
It will not involve weight, na, Dr. Virappa. It will not involve weight. Something that doesn't involve weight.
The mid-arm circumference.
It's a 2.5 months old child, so we thought mid-arm circumference is
You
validated.
could also do skin fold thickness. That is the other thing you could do.
Also, when you're having a small baby, don't talk about pitting pedal edema,
Yes, ma'am.
because the child is usually lying flat, so there will be a presacral or an anasarca. If there's anasarca, you can say dorsopedal edema, which means that the peripheries are having edema and the trunk is fairly spared. If you want to give a picture, you would say pedal edema is usually for children who have dependent kind of edema, or you can say this swelling of the skin or edema up to the say knees or up to the elbows. That will give a better picture. Was there facial puffiness?
Yes, my periorbital swelling and my facial puffiness was there.
Okay, fine. All right.
So length is 51 centimeters, and again it is when it is plotted, it was below the third centile. Head circumference is 35.5 centimeters. Again, that is below the third centile. Examination of the abdomen. Shape of the abdomen appeared distended. Umbilicus is transversely stretched, and all quadrants were moving equally with respiration. There is no dilated veins or any visible pulsations in the abdominal wall. Hernial sites appeared normal, and external genitalia was normal. Palpation: the abdomen was soft, no particular tenderness. Liver is palpable in the midclavicular line, around 3 centimeters from the right costal margin, which is soft in consistency. Surface was smooth, and margins were rounded. It was not tender, and the left lobe of the liver was not palpable. There is no spleen was palpable. Spleen was not palpable. And percussion, with whatever we could do, we got a liver span of around 6 centimeters, and there was fluid collection in the abdomen. Shifting dullness was there, and no fluid thrill. On auscultation, bowel sounds were heard normally, and there is no growing. Examination of the cardiovascular system. Inspection, the chest appeared
That's all normal, na? So you can, if it's normal, you can go to the next slide. We can spend more time on discussion.
Yes, sir. So only in auscultation there was a grade 2/6 systolic murmur heard over the pulmonary areas, and respiratory system was normal, and central nervous system, child was a bit dull and apathetic, and there is no focal deficits, and the tone was normal. So this is my summary, and a 2-month, 25 days old female infant, third born of non-consanguineous marriage with history of 2 sibling deaths, was exclusively breastfed since birth, presented with failure to thrive of early infantile origin, 2 weeks history of persistent diarrhea, and 2 days of anasarca. On examination, baby was found to be pale, and there was anasarca and non-tender hepatomegaly with anthropometric measurements confirming failure to thrive. So she's an infant with early onset, probably an organic cause, which explains the failure to thrive.
No, these terms that you are using, na, probably an organic cause. You have any doubt that this child has a disease? Why should you say probably an organic cause?
Mostly it's a
Just say this is a child who has, you have said everything. So don't add these adjectives which are not helping you. It is an organic cause. I mean, 2 children have died. This child has poor growth, anasarca on examination. You've shown a anthropometry showing severe failure to thrive. So now move on to the diagnosis. What are the diagnoses that you think, and how will you approach? Now you have come to that part where you have to list a list of differentials, and then how will you approach to the diagnosis? And if you are a very good postgraduate, we can come to management after that.
So
Go ahead.
yes. Will you proceed with the investigation, sir?
No, where is your
Oh.
differential?
Dr. Veerappan or Dr. Deepa, any one of you can do this. Dr. Rohan is saying you have already elaborated the causes, no? What you're thinking about.
Yes, sir.
Put them in
Yes, sir.
order and
Yes,
say this is an infant, of course, with an organic cause, with failure to
Right.
thrive and diarrhea. And my differential diagnosis will be number 1. What?
First different. Ma'am?
Deepa can say. Is Dr. Deepa there?
Ma'am, it's an infant with early onset organic failure to thrive. This past history of
Yeah, your
sibling
differential diagnosis.
ma'am, it could be an primary immunodeficiency because of the past two sibling death also, or it could be some malabsorption or some maldigestive process, or it could be some structural defect that is causing this diarrhea as well as failure to thrive.
So in this case, you have to say the possibility is child has chronic diarrhea, failure to thrive with SIB death. So first possibility is a congenital diarrheal syndrome, COD, congenital or diarrhea and enteropathy syndrome. That is the first possibility. Okay.
Okay.
Second is some other genetic disorder which can cause malabsorption, maldigestion, maybe CF or SBDS or something like that. Then also there is a possibility that there is an immune deficiency which is causing recurrent infections and child death. So these are the three possibilities. Now in these three categories, then you list a couple of things that you are strongly suspecting. That is how you will go. For example, if I was in Dr. Virappan's place, I would say, okay, congenital diarrheas, very strong family history, CTE, MVID, DJAT deficiency, maybe some congenital lymphangiectasia with genetic component. If there is fat malabsorption, maybe cystic fibrosis or Schwarzman-Diamond syndrome. And as I said, immunodeficiency, you will think of an SCID. So you must say these 6-7 things. And then how will you evaluate? Don't tell us what happened to the child. How would you evaluate this? Dr. Deepa, how would you evaluate this child? Child is with you. What would you do to evaluate?
So first I'll do a complete hemogram. From that, along with the HP, along with the RBC indices, we will get an idea about whether there's anemia and the type of anemia. And then the total count will give us an idea whether there's an infectious process going on. And the differential count, we can see whether there's any lymphopenia to suggest immunodeficiency in this case, or some in thrombocytopenia if you're suspecting any intrauterine infections causing IUGR and similar pattern. Immunodeficiency, we will get a clue from this complete hemogram, and also we'll know whether there's an anemia from the complete hemogram.
Okay, you've done a hemogram, then what else?
Then we can proceed with serum electrolytes. Since there is edema also, we would like to know the electrolyte status of the baby. There's continuous diarrhea for the past 2 weeks. So I'll do serum sodium, potassium, and also a blood gas will give us an idea. Blood gas with pH will give an idea whether there's an acidosis. And along with that, if there is the chloride measurement, will give an idea whether there's hypochloremia in this case.
Will help you to identify what?
Ma'am, congenital chloride losing diarrhea will present with hypochloremic. And also,
Okay. Sodium will help you to identify what?
hello?
You said electrolytes. You said electrolytes, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So sodium, potassium, chloride, and bicarb.
The sodium losing
What will
diarrhea,
you interpret from this? Okay.
ma'am, whether we can
You
see
will
whether
have what? Hyponatremia.
a metabolic acidosis or metabolic alkalosis, first of all, from the pH. And
What will produce metabolic and what will produce metabolic alkalosis?
chloride losing diarrhea can produce metabolic alkalosis.
CF can also produce metabolic.
CF can also produce
CF can
rather
also-
than acidosis.
What is that called?
What is that condition
What is that
called,
called?
ma'am is asking. When CF produces,
Pseudobarter.
Yeah. So what are the
Yeah.
features of soda butter?
Then there will be hyponatremia, hypochloremia,
Very good.
then metabolic alkalosis, bicarb will be low.
okay, how will you evaluate his malabsorption, whether he has fat or protein or what? How will you evaluate that? How will you evaluate his malabsorption? What will you do on the stool, and what blood tests will tell you about his malabsorption?
So we have to, we can divide it as whether we are suspecting a carbohydrate, fat, or protein malabsorption. And carbohydrate, if we are doing a stool analysis, the stool pH will be acidic and stool reducing substance will be positive. At least more than 2 plus will be the value if there is carbohydrate malabsorption. That's from the stool analysis. And further, we can go for a breath hydrogen test, sir.
So 2.5-month-old baby, you can't do breath hydrogen testing, no?
Yes,
Mm.
sir.
So you will test for anything in the stool, some elastase or some protein, or how do you test for protein losing enteropathy? How do you test for fat malabsorption?
Protein losing from the serum, we can hypoalbuminemia will give us a clue, sir. And in stool, we can check alpha and antitrypsin.
Yes, very good. What else? You can do fecal elastase.
Yes, sir. Fecal elastase for exocrine function, pancreatic function.
Yes.
Then function and gold standard, we'll have to go for a duodenal aspirate.
No, you don't have to do duodenal aspirate. You can do fecal elastase.
Okay.
Mm.
We don't
What else?
aspirate.
Then for fat, we can go for a steatocrit.
Okay.
Then quantitative determination of fat.
Okay, I think Dr. Geeta, I think Dr. Virappan can proceed, and then in the end we can discuss what is the correct way to. I think. What do you suggest? I think Dr. Virappan can proceed, and then at the end we can discuss the approach. Dr. Virappan, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So, proceeded with the investigations of this child. Her HB was 7.7 gram per deciliter, MCV was 85.5, MCH was 25.6, and MCHC was 29.9. Total count was 15,800 with a polymorphic concentration of 33% and lymphocytes of 64. Platelets was 1,48,000, and her blood sugar, random blood sugar was 106 milligram per deciliter. So her electrolyte showed sodium of 134, potassium 4.5, and chlorine of 106. Bicarbonate was 15, and blood pH was 7.42. Peripheral smear showed a normocytic normochromic anemia with mild thrombocytopenia, and there was no atypical cells. So
Your interpretation, Dr. Previous slide. Your interpretation.
She's anemic, hemoglobin is low, and blood.
Count is slightly high, but only lymphocytes.
Ma'am,
No electrolyte imbalance.
no electrolyte
No electrolyte imbalance.
pH is normal, and counts normal. Blood sugar is also normal.
Okay, next.
So SDOT was 51, and SBPT was 47, and serum bilirubin of 1.2 milligram per deciliter with a direct fraction of 0.4. PT was prothrombin time was 14 seconds with an INR of 1, and total protein is 3.3 gram per deciliter with a serum albumin of 1.6 gram per deciliter. And we took a culture as the child is not thriving well. As always, sepsis has to be considered. We took a culture, and culture was negative. And urine complete analysis was normal. Stool analysis showed a stool pH of 5. Reducing substance was negative with fat globules were seen in the stool analysis. Stool sodium was 10, stool potassium was 54, and osmolar gap is 162 milliequivalents per liter. And there is no RBC, and OVA and parasites were absent in the stool analysis. Fecal elastase we did, which is 124 microgram per gram, and the normal value for our reference is more than 200.
To Virappan.
Yes, ma'am.
Can this be a rotavirus diarrhea?
Viral cause of diarrhea is a possibility in this case, but it is running since 1.5 months for the 15 days, and this problem is happening to be from the birth because the child is not thriving well. So probably an infective cause of in this scenario will be little unlikely rather than a non-infective or a malabsorption cause of this diarrhea.
But also keep it in your differentials because it's a common age group for diarrhea. It can occur in children who are having to thrive, and you will be asked why you did not mention it. may not be in their first differential diagnosis, but also think of it. You were talking about your fecal elastase. The normal is
Yes,
more
ma'am.
than 200, and the low value in according to your lab is less than. Is this borderline or is this low according to your lab?
It's low. It is low now.
So fecal elastase is a little bit lower in infants. Normal value is more than 500. More than 500, that means there is no pancreatic insufficiency. It's the value in infants. The pancreas becomes mature by about 4 months of age. So this value is quite low for even for an infant.
Veerapan, you can move on to the next slide. Carry on, carry on.
So this is the report of the genetic analysis which showed a mutation in the CFTR gene, and it was a proven case of cystic fibrosis. And she also had some homozygosity in SBDS gene, and she has some superadded Schwamm-Diamond syndrome phenotype also in this.
So that is all the evaluation that was done. We didn't do a scope or proctoscopy, diurnal biopsies, electron microscopy. All that wasn't done.
So as the baby was hospitalized, and we got as she was acutely unwell in a state of decompensated state, we started.
So if the baby is acutely unwell, then endoscopy is easier to do than setting exome takes 6 weeks to come back. No?
Yes, sir. So
What would
since
you have
we
done?
got the.
If you had the facility, would you have in the evaluation at this point of time? You have done the stool elastase, fecal elastase. What would have been your next step in evaluating this child? I understand that you've got the diagnosis before that, but just assume that you did not get this report by then. So what would your approach have been? What would you have done next?
Ma'am, as we got like fecal elastase is low, there we got the conclusion there is an exocrine pancreatic insufficiency is there. So we started as the baby was in a state of decompensated state, we admitted and we started her on total parental nutrition, give her nutritional support. And since elastase was low, so we started the baby on pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy, and we gradually reintroduced feeds in a smaller quantity, and we proceeded accordingly as blue stools was getting controlled. And further evaluation in this could be for any exocrine pancreatic insufficiency. The other possible tests are immunoreactive trypsinogen is a possibility we can do in case of cystic fibrosis. Even serum trypsinogen level will be too high in the early stages, so that is used as a screening modality to pick up cystic fibrosis. But as days progresses, the level starts coming down, and the validation is a problem for this child because the child is 2.5 months old. Then sweat chloride test is possible we can do, as we have done a fecal elastase low. Then we should have proceeded with the sweat chloride test, but we don't have that provision to do a sweat chloride test here, ma'am. And since we thought like we needed a genetic diagnosis at that point of time, as we had 2 previous sibling deaths, and so we thought doing a genetic screening at that point of time will make some sense. So we proceeded with that.
You're absolutely correct in sending the genetic analysis. But I'm asking you, if you got this report and you're having the baby in front of you,
yes,
would you have considered, like Dr. Rohan is asking, would you have considered doing an endoscopy and biopsy? If so, what would it have contributed? How would it have contributed to your diagnosis? Not only diagnosis, your differential diagnosis. You're having a few differential diagnoses in your mind. You had enteropathies, you had immunodeficiencies, and you had this maldigestion, cystic fibrosis. So it is your duty to rule out the other conditions also. So rule out immunodeficiency. What have and rule out enteropathies? What are the other investigations that you can do? Supposing this is an exam case and you don't have, nobody gives you the genetic report. They ask you what next investigation. Deepa can also help here. What other investigations would you do in a child with chronic diarrhea and a SARCA and failure to thrive, other than what you have already mentioned so far?
Then we can do an endoscopy, we can take biopsy, staining of
where?
the biopsy, electron microscopy will give us idea about any structural defects like any microvillus atrophy. Um, then segmental lesions may be seen in lymphangiectasia or repeat ultrasound on very thickened bowel that is responsible for protein loss.
See, this you have got the diagnosis here, but this is not the optimal way to approach this case if you are trying to make a diagnosis, because you may not always get a genetic diagnosis. So suppose this child has autoimmune enteropathy, and there will be nothing in the genetics. You have to look at the biopsy. So you have to go with an approach which will give you the maximal output. I fully agree. You have to send the genetics as soon as possible. It's a very useful test now. It's very affordable, and you must send it off as soon as possible. Especially in this case, it is completely warranted. First thing you must do is you must put the child NPO 6 hours, 8 hours. See what happens to the diarrhea. If the diarrhea completely stops, it is absolutely stops on making the child NPO, then you reintroduce ORS to the child. If the child has no diarrhea on ORS, then you are dealing with something like a congenital lactase deficiency or a sucrose isomaltose deficiency. If the child's diarrhea stops on making the child NPO, and then you give him ORS, and the diarrhea reoccurs on ORS, that means it's an osmotic diarrhea which recurs on ORS, then you have a glucose galactose malabsorption. Then what you can do is you can get your pharmacy to make an ORS with fructose and give that child the fructose based ORS. And if there is no diarrhea on that, this is this entity, and there is a separate glucose free formula that you have to give them. Okay. Then if you have any evidence of fat malabsorption, you must do a fecal elastase as they have done. And the top 3 causes of pancreatic insufficiency in children are CF, CF, and CF. After that, you think of some rare causes like SBDS. If the fecal elastase is normal and then you're having still fat malabsorption, you need a biopsy of the duodenum to look at things like A beta lipoproteinemia or chylomicron retention disease, which will show you fat malabsorption and changes in the villi. So if there is fat malabsorption, do a fecal elastase, do an ultrasound of the pancreas to see if the pancreas is dystrophic or not. Like in SBDS, you see a dystrophic pancreas. And you do an endoscopy and biopsy to look for A beta lipoproteinemia and chylomicron retention disease. If you have none of these, you do a biopsy, you classify it either if you have villus atrophy or you don't have villus atrophy. If you have villus atrophy, is it an inflammatory villus atrophy? Is there plasma cells, lymphocytes in the biopsy? Then you think of more of an autoimmune enteropathy. Otherwise, you get particular changes like microvillus inclusion disease or congenital tufting enteropathy, which you can see on light microscopy also. If there is no villus atrophy, then you think of the conditions like Dr. Deepa said, chloride diarrhea or sodium diarrhea. So I have shared with the group, we have just published a paper on a series of kids with congenital enteropathies. And there is an algorithm in that which is useful for PGs to remember when you're working up this case. I've sent it to the WhatsApp group. So after this, you can have a look at that. But this is basically what I've just enumerated. In my personal experience, CF can present like anything. It has presented with cholestasis, diarrhea, liver disease. So it should always be in the differential, and you've correctly made the diagnosis here. But if you don't follow a algorithm, you will miss some of these conditions because they are rare conditions. They're difficult to remember. Unless you follow a set protocol, you might miss one of them. Is that what I'm trying to say?
Clue in the biopsies regarding immunodeficiency, Deepa?
Hello, ma'am.
Dr. Deepa,
Is
for duodenal biopsy, If you're suspecting immune deficiency, what will you look for?
Not sure, ma'am.
Absence of
Something?
X-linked A-gamma globulin.
The absence of plasma cells may be an indicator that this is an immune deficiency. So you have to look for absence of plasma cells. So when you're doing D2 biopsies, there are multiple things, like he said, whether there is villus atrophy, whether there is lipid inclusions, and absence of plasma cells can also be a clue.
Okay, ma'am.
Can I ask
Now
the
that you've made
panelists to, our moderators, because you're practicing pediatric gastroenterologist, you probably have access. Most of the audience listening and many of people even in corporate hospitals would not have access to pediatric endoscopies. Is there some other algorithm that we would find it more useful that you can share with the postgraduates, dear moderators, ma'am and Malik sir? If you don't have access to
Unfortunately, these conditions they're difficult to manage. Outcomes are not great. There's more than 50% mortality in most of these cases. Maybe sometimes the only thing you can offer them is a diagnosis, so you can have prenatal counseling in the next pregnancy. So I think as a pediatrician, if you identify that this is a code, that this is a congenital enteropathy, that is the most important function here. That you identify that this is not just a persistent diarrhea, there is something else going on. And then you should involve a gastroenterologist. Now there are gastroenterologists in every city, I think, or or close by. So manage him with his or her help. And these biopsies will help, not always, but they will definitely help. So I don't think you can manage them just without input from a person who is a little bit more used to looking at GI issues. So it should be managed by a team. As pediatricians, you will have a lot of skills in giving him TPN, managing his sepsis, hyperproteinemia, all of that, and involve your gastroenterologist to narrow down the diagnosis, and just simple things as keeping him NPO, seeing if it is osmotic diarrhea, getting biopsies. So that team management is required. You can't manage them just on your own, unfortunately. And they're the most challenging cases that you can admit in any ward, because there's small baby constantly having diarrhea, not growing, sepsis. So they're very challenging. Mortality rates are high in this. The patients we've had, more than half have died, most of them.
I would agree with Dr. Rohan. Being pediatric gastroenterologist, we would end up doing endoscopy anyway in these patients. Like Dr. Rohan also said, diagnosis is paramount for these patients because counseling is important. So in this case, for example, now that you've got a diagnosis, you don't actually need to do an endoscopy. You can actually go ahead and manage these patients. The problem also is that how will you manage these patients without having a diagnosis? You have to manage even before you get the diagnosis. So if you have problems with nutrition, with feeding the child, then like you said, you have to keep the child NPO, go for TPN, and then slowly rehabilitate the patient. You cannot keep them on TPN for a very long time. So once you've made a diagnosis of cystic fibrosis, say in this patient, Dr. Veerappan or Dr. Deepa, how would you manage to rehabilitate this patient? How will you get this patient back on oral diet?
Ma'am, as a child came to us in a state of decompensated, she had a generalized edema, she had a protein loss. First, we admitted her and we started the child on we kept the baby NPO and we started her on total parenteral nutrition. We gave calories in the form of dextrose, we gave amino acid infusion and lipids. And parallelly, we started investigating the child also. Meanwhile, we did as the child is having failure to thrive, she is prone to develop electrolyte imbalances, which we got confirmed with our reports. There was no electrolyte imbalance. They are prone to develop hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, which has to be corrected. And we have to make sepsis as one of our differentials in any decompensated site. So we gave her prophylactic antibiotics. As when cultures came negative, we stopped her antibiotics. Only after 3 or 4 days, we got this fecal elastase report. At that time, we had an idea this child is having an exocrine pancreatic insufficiency. So we thought of reintroducing feeds along with the pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy. So we gave pancreatic enzymes along. We started feeds in a small quantity, and we started establishing it once the child started receiving it well, and the frequency of loose stools have started coming down. So
Viruppan, one practical question: when you started PERT, pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy, get one capsule. That capsule is 10,000 units of lipase. So how just for the benefit of other postgraduates, how will you can't give this infant that capsule, right? What is the dosing? How will you use that?
Sir, we arbitrarily take for every 100 ml of breast milk, we can usually give 2,000 units per kg, per 100 ml of breast milk has to be given.
Okay.
So that has to be mixed with breast milk, and we gave.
So how do you calculate 2,000 units? Is my question.
So it's an entry quota tablet, sir. So we have to arbitrarily divide it. So each that inside whatever is inside, it is around 10,000. So
no, you have to count how many. These are small granules. You open up the capsule, you count how many granules are there, and you divide it by 10,000, and then you will know how many granules to give for each feed. This is important. If you give too much, there are complications. So you take the capsule, you open it up. Suppose there are 100 little granules in it. So then each is so many, and then you calculate and give. Usually you give 500 to 1,000 per meal in older children. This, as you said, breast milk, you have to take arbitrary unit. But this is something which is important because it can cause fibrosing colopathy if you give too much.
How will you monitor this? Whatever you're giving is good enough for the child. How will you monitor?
Yes, ma'am. We have to assess her growth in a periodic manner. Like we have to start an enzyme replacement therapy, and we have to first we have to explain the condition to the mother and both the parents and how it is going to be. So the first and foremost is she is having a malabsorption because of absence of pancreatic enzyme, which we are replacing. So the absorption has to improve, and the frequency of loose stools should come down, and baby should start thriving well because.
Frequency will come down, consistency will be better.
Better, yes, ma'am. Frequency will come down, consistency will be better.
And the fat and weight gain.
Weight gain will be there, so it has to be monitored, ma'am. At least for since we have started and we have come to full feeds, at least every weekly I'll ask her to monitor the weight in a nearby clinic, and I'll make sure that the baby is gaining weight from the previous week's weight. So then we are moving in the right track. And we have to
when the child
upon. Yes.
When child is weaned, what will you do?
Ma'am, child is
weaned.
Weaning diet. When they start solid diet.
Yes, ma'am.
Then how will you
again dose, ma'am. Dose you are asking for.
Yeah, you have to increase the dose based on the number of feeds that the child
number
is
of
taking.
meals, yes. For every meal, I have to give 2,000 to
Okay. So you have. Okay.
So 500 to 1,000 units, 500 to 1,000 units per kg for a major meal, and half of that for snacks. And then you titrate, as ma'am has told you, you have to titrate. You have to see what's happening to the kid. It's not as simple as that, though. You have to, they don't grow often. You can end up with problems.
It's not enough if you look only at the stools and the diet. There are other systemic complications for this child. What other system problems can you anticipate, and whom else can you involve in that?
Ma'am, it can affect the respiratory system. That is they are prone to develop respiratory infections and again and again. That has to be said while counseling in any child with cystic fibrosis. It can affect depending upon the manifestations, we have to anticipate and treat infections, especially because of the stasis of secretions. They are prone to develop Staph aureus, Pseudomonas, and Burkholderia infections of the respiratory tract, which has to be treated. they are also prone to develop some hepatobiliary manifestations in the form of cholestatic jaundice and exocrine pancreatic insufficiency in this child. And even in genitourinary, it can cause hernias can be there. If it is a male child, testis will like undescended testis it can cause, and so it is usually multi-system involvement. So every system has.
Yeah, so good. So what I'm trying to say is that it is the GI part must be the easier part to treat. It is the respiratory part which will decide how long the child lives and how much morbidity he will have. So these children need to be on a weekly follow-up from the pulmonology side, and probably proactively you have to keep ensuring that they don't get respiratory infections, because that can also cause failure to thrive. It is not just the diarrhea. You may treat the diarrhea may come down, child may be okay with the stools, but child will not gain weight because of recurrent respiratory infections. So just because we have made a diagnosis cystic fibrosis does not mean we keep on titrating the dose. Even though there is no diarrhea, you have to look at the whole child and make sure that no other subtle infections or carrier state is going on. All right. Dr. Rohan, anything?
Ma'am, just to add, the protocol we followed in the CF cohorts overseas was, if they come to the gastroenterologist for growth, if their lungs are well controlled and all, they come to you for growth, you put them on your pancreatic enzyme replacement, but their appetite is often poor, and they often have, so many things you listed, so they can have concomitant liver dysfunction, etc. So you put them on PERT, you optimize your PERT, look at the fecal elastase. Then if their appetites are poor, you put them on something like cyproheptadine, to increase their appetite. And often these kids end up having a PEG tube put in, because there are several studies which have shown that if you improve the nutritional status of children with CF, all other organ systems do much better. The lungs do much better, the liver does much better. So these children often they end up having a PEG tube to supplement their nutrition so that they can have good, body fat and protein and stuff. So something which is neglected in chronic cases is nutrition. Nutrition is very important. You can't miss out on nutrition and growth in these kids, and so much so that most of them had PEG tubes. Here we've tried putting in PEG tubes, but there are some region specific issues. Parents are not happy with the PEG tube, but ideally if you have a PEG tube, their nutrition does improve. And there are papers which show before and after PEG tube the nutrition improves. The idea is not to promote a PEG tube. Idea is to say you have to look at their nutrition very closely and really be aggressive about their nutrition. I think that's all from I have shared an algorithm on the group. I think postgraduates who want to go through it, just a simple algorithm which you can just keep in your notes when you get a case like this. It might be useful for you, but it's a very interesting case, I think.
The other thing is that without the support of a lot of financial philanthropists, it's very difficult to sustain this child beyond the first and second decade. Even second decade is impossible.
Yeah.
With the state support in foreign countries, it's possible to a long extent, but in our country, with a child of this kind of socioeconomic background, they are doomed to die. And 3 children have already had this condition. So counseling really needs to be on track for this child family, because it's possible that the next child may also be affected, and therefore they need to be aware of it.
The other thing is very important point ma'am raised, which I just want to talk about, is how much pancreatic enzymes are expensive. Pancreatic enzymes cost 5,000 to 10,000 rupees a month. So just pancreatic enzymes, leave alone the admissions and the lung care and all of that. Just pancreatic enzymes, this family, you said 15,000 per month is the income. This pancreatic enzymes themselves will be a big drain on their resources. So other thing, as a pediatrician, you should start looking at social resources for this. If he can get some grants or government funds or some hospital where they can give him subsidized or free medicine, that will really help this family.
Case for discussion. It's a very rare case. And thank you for bringing this case for discussion. Any of
Dr.
the PGs
Bablu,
have any queries?
just a minute, ma'am. Before we round off, Dr. Bablu has not been involved in the presentation for a very long while. Would you want
Yes,
him
sir.
to talk about counseling these parents? How do you counsel these parents? That is a very, very important thing. And if the 3 years, 4 years down the line, they're planning to have another baby, what would your advice be, Dr. Bablu?
Yes, sir. It's an autosomal recessive.
Yes, please go ahead.
It's an autosomal recessive condition, sir. So if they're planning a child now, like 50% of the sibling might be carriers, 25% might be like unaffected, and 25% will be affected. So it will be good that they have a during the antenatal period, they have an test done like amniocentesis or chorionic villus sampling done, and to do a genetic testing on that as well. So that we have an antenatal diagnosis for the other child, for the upcoming child. So that we can plan accordingly, we can tell them like this child is likely to be affected, or supposed to, or otherwise is in a state of a carrier state or unaffected. So that will be the most important thing to be done, sir.
And how do you keep this baby's Akshaya's lungs healthy?
Aksha's lung healthy, we can keep the airway clearance therapy by giving chest physiotherapy, sir. We can have inhalation therapy as well. That can be also done. That is the main thing, sir. Corticosteroids can be given. That is another thing, sir.
Inhale corticosteroids, and do not neglect the importance of vaccination. They should receive their full course of vaccination, probably seasonal influenza vaccination, pneumococcal vaccination, airway clearance, and adequate attention to nutrition and good monitoring of growth and development. Is there any other comment from the moderators? Is there something else that you'd like to impart as a take-home message for the postgraduates who have tuned in? Geeta ma'am, Malik sir?
I think it was a good discussion and good case to discuss. Thank you for involving me. And I think Geeta ma'am can give the final comments, and then we can, from our side, we can wrap up.
Question in the chat box, any clue from an ultrasound? I'm not sure if it's antenatal or I think that was an antenatal ultrasound. Unfortunately, no. There's some talk about polyhydramnios being there, but that's much later in the pregnancy. Not enough to help us make a diagnosis in the first trimester. If you want to make a diagnosis in the first trimester, the only way is to do a chorionic villi sampling and make sure that the genetic test, the specific gene is checked for. So that answers the question. If the postgraduates have any queries that they would like to ask at this point, we are willing to take them. Dr. Veerappan, any questions?
Veerappan, stop sharing.
Yes, sir.
Clues of bubble wall thickening and GB changes can happen in the neonate, but it's difficult to make an antenatal diagnosis. So that may not be good enough. And also the bubble walls start being visible much more clearly only towards the end of the second trimester, by which time it's too late to abort the child. So diagnosis has to be done in the first trimester, and that's when chorionic villi sampling is better. So thank you all for having.
Yeah, on behalf of IAP TNS, I thank it's excellent presentation under guidance of Dr. Aspath. Now is with Dr. Rogan Malik as well as Dr. Geeta. Now that our judges are viewing this program, now I request Dr. Srinivasan sir, your comments, sir. Dr. Srinivasan sir. Dr. PRC sir, yeah.
Thank you. It was a wonderful discussion, and full credit to the Dr. Veerappan, Dr. Deepa, and Dr. Babu for doing a very good discussion. Actually, the slides are excellent. The history was done very well. So I should especially appreciate the history, and he's trying to analyze the differential diagnosis based on the history. So that is a very, very, it's nice to look at that. And you are able to answer most of the, because you are facing the experts who have been in this field for probably 2 decades or more, though they look very, very young.
Sir, I am not
I
that
know
old.
that they have got a lot of
I don't think Dr.
experience.
Geeta is also that old.
Dr.
knowledge
Geeta was
based
our
knowledge.
postgraduate, I think nearly maybe around 12 years back or 15 years back. So they're all experts. So as a general pediatric postgraduate, as it's rightly mentioned by Dr. Malik, what is expected of you, you came up to that level very, very well. Okay, you were able to answer what is expected for from a general pediatric postgraduate, how to identify and when to suspect, and how to monitor. I think not surprising when you are Ashwat students. Okay, so the credit goes to your mentor equally. So I really enjoyed, and very nice incisive questions from Dr. Malik as well as Dr. Geeta.
Yeah, Dr.
So they
Rajendran
took
students
step
also.
by step. They
Really
took you step by step, and really we as the observers actually learned and enjoyed a lot of things. See, these are some things which we do not usually discuss much. We generally go only hepatosplenomegaly and things like that in exam. So we do not discuss actually these some of the very, very important problems which are actually symptoms based, which as a general pediatrician we have to know. And when so many causes of failure to thrive with diarrhea, so this is very useful for all the people, including the faculty. Thank you so much for the opportunity, TNS.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Srinivasan, sir.
Dr. Srinivasan has nothing more to say than what Ramachandran has said so much. I echo the same words. So we are also learning along with the postgraduates, with all these experts giving their constant inputs, because we are all generalists. So naturally, they're coming in and telling about what is important to be done. Okay, for example, in this case, what is the importance of gastrointestinal biopsy, etc., whereas genetic study is so costly and may not be available. So such important points come in. And of course, it's very surprising that such a small, 3 children in the same family, very interesting case. And of course, we are also benefited. Thank you, both of you, for increasing the insight into cystic fibrosis. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Elil madam from ICH, the director and ICH Institute of Child Health, Egmore, Chennai.
Good evening, and thank you for the wonderful opportunity. I'm so happy I am not sitting in the place of Dr. Veerappan Sivabalan, because it's such a tough case, and being the moderators and the way they were drilling, and he stood it, and his colleagues also did so well. And now that most of us know that cystic fibrosis is not uncommon, we are coming across quite a few. But I don't know how good this child will survive, because diagnosis at so young age, in our pulmonology, when we make the diagnosis, these children don't make it so good. The ones who are diagnosed so early, and they always mimic the Schwammen-Diamond with the neutropenia and all that. But the children who are diagnosed late, they do well. So we don't know, but it's a fantastic case. Very sad for the parents that they are non-consanguineous, but losing third child also is affected. The moderators were very good, tough. I am very happy. I am not one of the students who used to be there. And Ashwat sir, as usual, you done well. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and also for the IE.
Yeah, I want to make one more comment I forgot to mention.
Our video is off. Okay. Yeah, Dr. Janani, madam.
Whenever such a case is given, and nowadays, of course, specialists come in as one of the examiners, not this. So naturally, on finer points, okay, they only want the basic approach to a child and how they present the case, and rest of the other finer things, which are known only to specialists, they give extra marks if they know for distinction or first. Am I correct, Dr. Rohan Malik? So
yes, sir.
Basic 50% of mark depends upon how they present, whether they are able to say whether it's invasive diarrhea or it's a osmotic diarrhea or secretory diarrhea, and definitions of protracted diarrhea, etc.
Yeah, it
So
is just
naturally, and how they approach and appreciate the various vitamin deficiencies. For example, skim, we said acryl, this thing. So if there are vesicles, pearl-like vesicles, dermatitis enteropathica may be a rare genetic disease. So like that, they would like to give more marks when such things are asked.
yes, because
So,
these are
yeah.
little obscure diseases. Not a
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't
Yeah,
deal with
very
them.
rare. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's only as a specialist you are expected to
Yeah.
even know about them and manage them. So we don't expect you to know the finer points of them. Neither you should, but only the approach, how you approach it as a syndrome. You identify that this child has this congenital diarrhea, and how you approach that. That is more than good enough, I think.
Dr. Janani, madam. Yeah.
Yeah,
Please,
it was a wonderful discussion. Nice to see Geeta, our ex-registrar of KKCTH. Great, Geeta. I mean, nice to see you after so many years. It was an excellent discussion, and I just wanted to find out whether any of these siblings in the family had presented with anemia requiring transfusion. Veerappan, anyone required transfusion in this group?
No, ma'am. As per their history, we didn't get a full detail.
Because cystic fibrosis sometimes can just present with failure to thrive, severe anemia, and edema. It's a triad which should make you suspect. So the other department where they can go to is to a hematologist. They can just present with anemia. I think Geeta and Dr. Malik will agree with me. We have seen cases who are present only with anemia, and then retrospectively, you look into the other details, then they evolve into cystic fibrosis at a later date. So that is one more point I wanted to add. Otherwise, it was a very good presentation. Thanks to Dr. Malik, Geeta, and Ashwath, and of course, Dr. Rajendran for the opportunity. Well done, students.
yeah, thank you, madam. And so finally, I request Dr. Ashwath to give a concluding remark.
I think it was a wonderful journey through the gut with this enthusiastic gastroenterologist grilling from both ends. The postgraduates were in an unenviable position. I think they brought in lots of valuable insights, especially Dr. Rohan's algorithmic approach for a child. I think, as he rightly said, it's only in the major cities that we have access to pediatric gastroenterologists. The point is also to be noted that a pediatrician or a postgraduate is not expected to make a diagnosis beyond the syndromic diagnosis. If he has identified a congenital diarrhea, if he has suspected a genetic basis, and he makes the referral to the correct person to give the correct diagnostic procedure, I think we have done our job as general pediatricians with the workup of the case. I think both the moderators really stress on the fact of good history taking, assiduous monitoring of growth, and then analyzing the symptoms to see whether it's protein or carbohydrate or fat malabsorption, trying to get by only history and physical examination what is the most likely diagnosis. So you have a DD even when you start investigating the child, rather than do a panel of expensive and extensive investigations and trying to pick up clues. I think those points were very well brought out. I thank once again our dear President Ismail sir, Dr. Gopal, and my very close friend and colleague, Dr. Rajendran, for the opportunity for having me as a chairperson. And thanks once again, moderators, for being there for the postgraduates and being so generous with your time and your inputs. A big namaste and a namaskar. And thanks again for the postgraduates for being patient and very assiduous, and for this excellent quality of slide presentations and withstanding the pressures from both the gastroenterologists. Thank you, one and all.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a really great day with under chairperson of Dr. Ashwath, and as well as moderator Rohan Malik and Dr. Geeta, and our judges are here. And a really wonderful presentation. And it is my duty to call Dr. Thirumurugan. Is a person who is success for me, and give a vote of thanks. Dr. Thirumurugan, Joint Secretary of IAP TNSC.
Hello, sir. I think thanks. It's really a great pleasure to be here to offer the vote of thanks. Usually I escape before the vote of thanks. So for once I'm stuck to this discussion, because the discussion was very nice. So let me start with thanking our chairperson, Dr. Ashwath, and our moderators, Dr. Rohan and Dr. Geeta, for a wonderful discussion. And my thanks to all the presenters who have prepared the case very well and who have analyzed it and identified and made the diagnosis and presented very well. And of course, they discussed it very well also. I think it's very hard on our judges actually to get hold of them every Saturday to do it, to actively get involved in this presentation. So I thank all the judges, my professor, Dr. Srinivasan sir, my examiner, Dr. PRC sir, Janani madam, and Dr. LRC, all of them who have been very keenly following every Saturday, all the meetings and giving their contributions also.
We are learning, man.
சார் உங்க எனர்ஜி முடியல, சாயந்தரம் எக்கோ கிளாஸ்லயும் பார்த்தேன். So anyhow, and of course my professor has got incredible energy. I don't know how he manages at this age. So thank you one and all. I think I should thank our president, our secretary, particularly Dr. Rajendran. I'm amazed at the quality of moderators and the chairpersons he is able to get for this discussions. I think it's a real treat for all the students of pediatrics. It's an opportunity which is not easily available. I mean, sometimes I look at all these people and I feel how envious of all of them, because when we study, we never had such an opportunity. So thank you one and all, and hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Asu, sir, Dr. Rohan Malik, and Dr. Geeta, and PRC, sir, Srinivasan, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Ananda.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Doctor, should I end the meeting now?
Thank you, Sivangi. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, doctor.